What the hell is Emu's power? The power of the all devil fruits? A devil fruit that can imitate all other devil fruits? Well, we still don't know. We still need Oda to drop more information about that. But today I'm going to talk about something that we already have more information, which are the weapons of Emu. Because in the first time we see Emu in his true form, he shows up in Elbaf holding a spear, or kind of a spear. Then, midway on his fight with Luffy, he switches from that spear into a sword. And in the most recent chapter, spoilers by the way, there will be spoilers for the most One Piece chapter, so if you didn't read yet, I'll give you time to skip, watch the chapter, and then come back to the video. Okay, let's keep going into it. He switched that sword that he used to stab Luffy, he switched to another sword. No, he didn't switch, actually, he left it in Luffy's body, which is interesting, because the first time Imus switches, he allows that spear to go back into his Omen or whatever, Amaterasu type stuff, and then he takes another weapon from that Omen. But this time around, he let that sword into Luffy, and then he took another one and proceeded to stab Luffy as well. By the way, I didn't understand something, so maybe you guys can clarify. Because the power of the first sword was to draw life, right? It was drawing life away from the forest. And the second sword, Emu said the same, that that sword draws life energy. But I think it works differently. Maybe it needs to make contact to take life away, while the other sword you can swing it and it takes life away from things around you, but maybe it takes less life away from your target, while the other sword, the new one that Emu pulled through, if you stab somebody it takes way more life. By the way, is Luffy going to survive? Will we have another Onigashima moment when in the fight versus Kaido Luffy died and then came back? Because things are looking very bad for Luffy. But let's go again to Imu's weapons. Because not only he has a lot of them, we see himself using 3 different weapons, because he was about to finish Luffy with an axe named after a Chinese god, and then we see Killingham and Summers using 2 different weapons that supposedly all belong to Emu, and Emu gives access of those weapons to the Royal Knights, which can wear the Omen. So first Emu needs to give the Omen to a Royal Knight, and then they can use the weapon. And the weapons seem to be very important. I think they are powered up with Omen as well, and apparently, even before they belonged to Emu, those weapons were really powerful and important to the world of One Piece. They are important because first, they are the symbol of the contract that allowed the world government to exist, because the 19 countries that came together to form the first form of the world government, they all placed their weapons in that throne room, which is used by Emu right now, in order to represent that nobody will be the ruler. We will not be better than anybody else, so we give our power away. And I thought, and everybody thought, at first, that scene was purely symbolism. But now, it's not, because I truly think those weapons were really powerful. I don't think Emu gave them their original power. I think Emu can make them stronger and do more damage and draw more life, for an example, but I think they played a role in making the countries where they belonged powerful. That's why they came together as 19 kingdoms to make the world government, because they were the most powerful kingdoms because of those weapons. Because those weapons seem to be really, really strong. Now, we don't know if the swords that draw life, we don't know if they do that because Emu or because of themselves. Because imagine that it's not Emu giving them that power. Imagine it's just the power of the sword in itself to draw life. And imagine there is this random kingdom that possesses that weapon. They have that weapon in their arsenal. They will win wars and they will conquer other kingdoms much easier just because of that single weapon. So those weapons represented perhaps the highest of the military might before the world government was formed. And we can even theorize that perhaps there was no devil fruit back in the day, or there was not so many devil fruit users, so those weapons would be really, really powerful. And those weapons might be more powerful than devil fruits in itself. Of course, devil fruits are more versatile and you can do crazy things with them, but those weapons, they are defeating at the moment a Gear 5 user, Luffy, of the Hitonomi fruit model Nika, and that's one of the most powerful devil fruits out there. Also, it's because Emu is the one using it, and because of his oh wait, he did set Stigma, so he was using one of his weapons when he stabbed Loki and when he stabbed Luffy. This point is to prove how powerful those weapons are. And that's important because the governments gave them away. The countries that made the government gave them away. So if those weapons were the highest of the military might of each country that gave them away, once they give them away, they become super weak. Thus, they cannot rebel versus the world government. And what do we know about that is that they gave it, or they placed that in the throne room, where supposedly nobody would be in the throne, but Emu is, and we don't know if the 19 families, the 19 kingdoms knew that Emu was present, or his plan, or that Emu would be the king, but imagine they didn't. Imagine they all came together. Maybe Emu was like just in the shadows, they didn't even knew that Emu existed. But they all came together, they placed the swords over there, they are very happy, they all trust each other, but there was one person in the shadows that now has access to the most powerful weapons in the world. Because if you don't think about the ancient weapons, and ain't those swords ancient weapons? Maybe. But those weapons, those swords, those axes, those spears, they are the most powerful weapons in the world. And now, the kingdoms that had them gave them away, and one person can use them all. That's incredible, and that's a great move, by the way. If Emu did that in the shadows, and he manipulated the governments to give their most powerful weapons away, so he can use them, and at the same time, now the kingdoms can't use them to rebel against Emu. That's 5D, 6D chess, you know what I'm saying? But now let's talk about the weapons in itself. How they got that power. And it's very interesting because we have two ways right now, because it's One Piece, so maybe it's something completely different. But in my perspective, there are two ways that those swords, those axes, and those spears got that powerful. First, Haki. Like we can see with Enma from Oden that now belongs to Zoro. That sword is really powerful because of Oden's Haki. I was about to say chakra. And Zoro's Haki himself can now fuel the sword and make it very, very powerful. So Haki in itself, cursed swords that they get so much Haki that they even gain personalities. That's a theory out there. The cursed swords have personalities, and just like the fruits, they go and look for the right user for them. And then the other option for those swords to become powerful are devil fruits in itself, because we've seen number and number times again certain weapons eating quote unquote devil fruits. We've seen the elephant sword from Spandam. We've seen the dog cannon, if I'm not mistaken, from Alabasta, from Baroque Works. And there are more cases, but I don't remember them at the moment. And like I said, it's One Piece, so maybe there was another way. Maybe it was not Haki, it was not Devil Fruits, maybe it was them two together creating those special weapons, but those weapons are really, really powerful, and this might be a new power system. So we had Devil Fruits, we had Haki, and now we might have these special weapons that have special powers. We still don't know the power of the axe, for an example, but Emu was like, it's over, with this axe is over. And another thing is that the way Emu gets access to the weapons, it seems it's kinda random. Because he got surprised when the axe came out, he was like, oh my, this is the one coming out now, or something like that. And he said to Luffy, oh, you are unfortunate, or no, you are lucky, because this is the weapon that will finish you. So it's like he didn't choose the weapon, it's like the weapon came out. But at the same time, he clearly chose the sword that took the life away from the forest, for an example. So I don't know what's happening there. Maybe he got surprised because nobody else took the axe, because we saw Killingham and Summers taking weapons from themselves, and maybe he thought that they would take the axe. And then it's so fitting that he takes the axe, and then Gaban shows up with his own axe to protect Luffy. So we know the power of the two swords, that it is to take life away. One seems indirectly, though the other seems to be directly. We don't know the powers of the spear and the power of the other sword that Summers is using, but I think they're very powerful in itself. The way that Killingham and Summers talked about those weapons, they were like, now with this you guys are screwed. With this you guys now are going down, right? And it's very interesting because first they were versus Zoro and versus Sanji, and the fight was going, we could say, slightly in the way of Sanji and Zoro. And now with those weapons, it seems like they feel that the fight is on their side, the fight is going their way, which means they trust those weapons to change the tide of the battle, and also supposedly those weapons belong to the families. So that confirms that the government was made by all the 19 families that are now part of the government, the man mayors and whatnot. And it's going to be interesting to see what weapons belong to which families, and what powers do they have, and how they became like that. How do they got those powers? And to finish the video here, I just think it's very interesting the way that Imu takes his weapons away, and the way he brings them out. It's like he transforms them into that little animated fire with eyes and a little mouth, and then they go back to his omen. That's very interesting. Does that mean they're made out of that? Or does that mean that Imu can transform matter into his fire or his omen? Because if we think about it, Luffy might be able to do that as well, because he can bend reality. He can bring the power of his imagination forward. So maybe Luffy can also transform matter into some form of white cloud or something, and then re-transform it. So I really thought that was interesting, and maybe that will be the answer to what those swords mean, those weapons I mean, what do they mean, where their power comes from, because Imu was able to transform them into his own fire, into his own omen. And I think that's the key. I think they were created by Imu's omen, or he enhanced them. Because I'm not really imagining back in the day, in One Piece world, one family, one kingdom having one sword that can draw life from others. That seems a bit too crazy. It seems like something that Imu would do with his own powers. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm really excited to see how the story develops now. It's interesting to see Imu using different weapons, and seeing the Royal Knights, the Holy Knights, using those weapons as well. And they're trusting them a lot, they're putting a lot of faith in the power of those weapons. And I totally didn't expect that. I thought Imu would just have his first spear that we see, and that's his weapon. You know, like Shanks has Griffin, Roger had Ace, how Zoro has his own swords. I thought that was that. That's Imu's spear, that's his weapon. Oh, actually, I just thought about something. That's another trait of Imu, which is like he doesn't have his own weapon. He's using somebody else's weapons. He's using the weapons of the 19 countries, the 19 kingdoms that came together to make the world government. So once again, Imu not using his own power. And maybe that's another hint for his devil fruit. He doesn't have his own devil fruit. He does not have his own power. He just uses the power of others. You know, like the Royal Knights do. The Royal Knights don't use their own power. They use the power of Imu. And maybe Imu can only use more power the more people are a part of the network, are a part of the contract, the covenant. And that's actually another great showing from Oda to show how Imu really needs somebody else's power to be that powerful. And that would be a good analogy, metaphor, and comparison to the rulers of our world, where they need the people's power to be in power. But that's for another video. Thank you very much for watching. Your support is greatly appreciated. I wish you the best thoughts, ideas, feelings, and emotions, and a whole bunch of individuality, creativity, and responsibility. Keep it cool, keep it healthy. See you on the next one.